Nervous impulses travel along a sequence of neurons called a pathway. Impulses from the receptors of touch, pressure, pain, temperature, and proprioception travel along sensory pathways to control centers. In turn, impulses leave the control centers and travel out motor pathways to effectors. Nervous pathways provide information and allow control of effectors by both the brain and spinal cord. Somatic sensory pathways carry sensory impulses from the head and body into the brain. This requires three neurons. The first order neuron carries action potentials from a receptor into the brain stem or spinal cord. The second order neuron carries action potentials to the thalamus. The third order neurons carry action potentials to the somatosensory area of the cerebrum or the cerebellum. Somatic impulses from the head enter the brainstem via neurons of different cranial nerves depending on the sensation carried. Cranial nerves 5, 7, 9, and 10 convey pain and temperature to the somatosensory area. These same cranial nerves also convey crude touch and pressure to the somatosensory area. Cranial nerve 5 conveys touch and conscious proprioception to the somatosensory area. Cranial nerve 5 conveys unconscious proprioception to the cerebellum. Somatosensory signals entering the spinal cord ascend to the brain in three general pathways depending on the sensory information they carry. There are posterior column medial lemniscus pathway, the anterolateral spinothalamic pathway, and spinocerebellar pathway. The posterior column medial lemniscus pathway consists of neurons that carry impulses for the sensation of the touch, conscious proprioception, and vibration. This pathway ends in the somatosensory area of the cerebrum on the opposite side of the receptor. The anterolateral spinothalamic pathway consists of neurons that carry impulses for the sensation of pressure, crude touch, pain, and temperature. This pathway ends in the somatosensory area of the cerebrum on the side opposite of the receptor. Somatic motor pathways convey action potential to skeletal muscles in two general ways: the direct motor pathway and indirect motor pathway. Direct motor pathways usually consist of three neurons. First, upper motor neurons, often arising in the primary motor area, convey impulses to motor control areas in the brainstem or down the spinal cord. Second, the interneurons connect upper motor neurons to lower motor neurons. Lower motor neurons arise from the motor control center in the brainstem to stimulate head and neck muscles from the anterior horn of the spinal cord and extend laterally to convey impulses that directly excite the muscles of the head, torso, and limbs. Action potentials originate in the primary motor area, motor cortex, and descend in the direct motor pathway to allow eye movement, facial expression, speech, and chewing. The primary motor area controls skeletal muscles movement on the opposite side of the body. Direct motor pathways contain the corticobulbar or cranial tract and corticospinal or spinal tract. The axons of upper neurons that control skeletal muscles in the head form the corticobulbar tract. These neurons carry motor impulses to the lower motor neurons in the brainstem that extend from the motor control centers and stimulate muscles of the head via cranial nerves. These control centers regulate eye movement, mastication or chewing, facial expression, and swallowing. The axons of upper neurons that control precise voluntary movement of skeletal muscles in the limbs and torso form what is known as the corticospinal tracts. These neurons carry motor impulses to the lower motor neurons in the anterior horn of the spinal cord and stimulate muscles of the limbs and body via spinal nerves. Indirect motor pathways make it possible for precise movement of limbs and maintenance of balance. In addition, involuntary movement of the eye and head in response to visual stimuli are also regulated by an indirect pathway. Impulses conveyed by indirect pathways also help maintain muscle tone. The axons of upper motor neurons of indirect motor pathways follow complex circuits from various parts of the brain and descend from the brainstem into 5 major tracts in the spinal cord. When they eventually synapse with the lower motor neurons that excite the skeletal muscles, they become part of the direct motor pathways. Thus, the lower motor neurons are often called the final common pathway.